For inheriting the old cabin, they all laughed at him, but later, they regretted it. Marcus Henderson shifted uncomfortably in the stiff leather chair, his fingers drumming nervously against his knee. The law office smelled of old books and expensive wood polish, the kind of place that made him feel out of place in his worn khakis and modest button-down shirt. Around him sat his 3 siblings, each looking far more comfortable in these surroundings than he felt. Jennifer, the eldest, sat with perfect posture in her designer suit, checking her phone every few minutes. She was a successful corporate lawyer in Chicago, and she made sure everyone knew it. Her manicured nails clicked against the screen as she scrolled through what Marcus assumed were important emails. She had flown in that morning on a red-eye flight, complaining about the inconvenience of having to deal with family matters during her busy season. Across from her, Robert lounged with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. He ran a successful car dealership franchise, owned a large house in the suburbs, and drove a different luxury vehicle every few months. His expensive watch caught the light from the window as he adjusted his cufflinks. Robert had always been the golden child, the one their parents pointed to as an example of success and ambition. Patricia, the second oldest, sat between Jennifer and Robert, literally and figuratively. She had married a wealthy investment banker and spent most of her time managing their household, planning charity galas, and posting carefully curated photos of her perfect life on social media. Her diamond earrings probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months as a high school history teacher. And then there was Marcus, 32 years old, still single, still renting a small apartment, still driving the same reliable but unremarkable sedan he had bought used 7 years ago. He loved his job teaching history to teenagers, loved seeing their eyes light up when the past suddenly became relevant to their lives. But in his family's eyes, he was the one who had never quite figured things out. The dreamer who chose passion over profit. The baby brother who still hadn't grown up. The lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, was an elderly man with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He cleared his throat and began reading from the official documents spread across his massive mahogany desk. Uncle Gerald had been their father's older brother, a quiet man who had never married, never had children of his own. He had worked as a forest ranger for most of his life, living simply and saving carefully. "To my nieces and nephews," Mr. Pemberton read in his formal practice voice, "I leave the following. My savings account, containing approximately $60,000, is to be divided equally among Jennifer, Robert, Patricia, and Marcus." Marcus did a quick calculation in his head, $15,000 each. It was generous, certainly more than he had expected, but not life-changing for any of them. Jennifer didn't even look up from her phone. Robert nodded as if this was exactly what he had anticipated. "My personal belongings, including my books, photographs, and collections, are to be divided among my nieces and nephews as they see fit," the lawyer continued. "And finally, my property in Montana, consisting of 47 acres and the cabin thereon, I leave entirely to my nephew Marcus Henderson." The room fell silent. Jennifer's head snapped up from her phone. Robert sat forward in his chair. Patricia's mouth opened slightly in surprise. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "I'm sorry," Jennifer said, her voice sharp. "Could you repeat that last part?" Mr. Pemberton looked at her over his glasses. "The Montana property goes to Marcus, the cabin and all 47 acres. "The old cabin?" Robert asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "That falling-apart shack in the middle of nowhere?" Marcus felt heat rising to his cheeks. He remembered that cabin, remembered it vividly even though he hadn't been there in over 15 years. He had spent several summers there as a boy, usually alone with Uncle Gerald, while his siblings chose more exciting vacations with friends or at fancy resorts. The cabin had been rustic even then, with an outhouse instead of a bathroom, a wood stove for heat and kerosene lamps for light. But Marcus had loved it. He had loved the quiet mornings when mist hung over the valley, the sound of the creek that ran behind the property, the way Uncle Gerald would take him on long walks through the forest, teaching him the names of trees and birds. "That place doesn't even have running water," Patricia said, wrinkling her nose. "Gerald never did fix it up, did he?" "The property is indeed rustic," Mr. Pemberton confirmed, consulting his notes. "According to the survey completed last year, the cabin requires significant repairs. The electrical system is outdated, there is no plumbing, and the structure itself has not been maintained in recent years." Jennifer started to laugh, a sharp sound that cut through the formal atmosphere of the office. "Oh, this is perfect," she said, looking at Marcus with something between pity and amusement. "Uncle Gerald leaves us money we can actually use, and he gives Marcus a money pit in the woods." Robert joined in, chuckling and shaking his head. "I mean, what are you going to do with it, little brother? It's 3 hours from the nearest real town. There's no cell phone service. The road up there is barely passable." "I think it's sweet," Patricia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Uncle Gerald always did have a soft spot for Marcus. Remember how they used to spend all that time together? I guess he wanted to give him something special, even if it's not exactly valuable. Marcus felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their judgment and their barely concealed mockery. He wanted to defend himself, to tell them that maybe value wasn't just measured in dollars and convenience, but the words stuck in his throat. They had always been like this, always so certain of what mattered and what didn't, always so quick to dismiss anything that didn't fit into their narrow definition of success. The property taxes are current, Mr. Pemberton continued, ignoring the siblings' comments with professional detachment. And there is a small maintenance fund that will cover basic expenses for approximately 1 year. After that, Mr. Henderson will be responsible for all costs associated with the property. So it's not even paid off? Robert asked, laughing harder now. Marcus, you just inherited a financial burden. You'd be better off just signing it over to the state or something. Actually, Mr. Pemberton said, a slight edge in his voice, the property is fully paid for. Your uncle owned it outright. I was referring only to ongoing taxes and maintenance. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, her amusement settling into something more patronizing. Look, Marcus, she said in the tone one might use with a child, if you want to keep it for sentimental reasons, that's your choice. But realistically, you're going to want to sell it. I can connect you with a real estate agent who specializes in rural properties. You might get $20,000 or $30,000 for it if you're lucky, given its condition. Maybe even less, Robert added. Land out there isn't worth much. Too remote for development, too small for commercial farming or ranching. Honestly, Uncle Gerald probably should have sold it years ago. Patricia pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm looking it up now, she announced. Let's see what comparable properties go for in that area. After a moment, she looked up with exaggerated sympathy. Oh, Marcus. Similar properties are listed between $15,000 and $40,000, and those ones actually have proper structures on them. Marcus finally found his voice. I'm not selling it, he said quietly. The three of them turned to look at him as if he had said something in a foreign language. What? Jennifer asked. I said I'm not selling it. Not right away, at least. I want to go see it first. Robert laughed again, this time with genuine incredulity. See it? Marcus, it's a dump. Trust me, I drove past it once about 10 years ago when I was up that way for a fishing trip. It was barely standing then. It's probably worse now. Your brother is right, Patricia said, her voice dripping with false concern. And think about the liability. What if someone gets hurt on the property? What if squatters move in? You'd be responsible for all of that. I still want to see it, Marcus insisted, his jaw tightening. Uncle Gerald left it to me, specifically. There must have been a reason. Jennifer rolled her eyes. The reason is that you were always his favorite. You were the only one willing to rough it out there in the wilderness with him, pretending to be some kind of pioneer. He probably thought you'd appreciate the gesture, even if the actual property is worthless. Enjoy your shack, little brother? Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She gathered her designer handbag and stood up, clearly ready to move on to more important things. When you're ready to be practical about this, let us know. We can help you find a buyer. As they all rose to leave, Robert clapped Marcus on the shoulder with exaggerated sympathy. Hey, at least you got something, right? That's better than nothing. Just don't sink any of your own money into it. It's not worth fixing up. They filed out of the office, Jennifer already back on her phone, Robert discussing dinner plans with Patricia. Marcus lingered behind, staring at the documents Mr. Suffery, Pemberton had given him. The deed to the property, the tax records, a hand-drawn map showing the boundaries of the land. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer said softly, and Marcus looked up. The old man's expression had softened slightly. Your uncle was a client of mine for many years. He was a thoughtful man. Very deliberate in his decisions. I don't believe he did anything without careful consideration. Marcus nodded, grateful for the kind words. Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. As he walked out to the parking lot, he could hear his siblings still laughing near their cars. Jennifer called out to him, Don't forget to call that real estate agent. You'll thank us later. Marcus got into his old sedan and sat there for a moment, his hands on the steering wheel. Their laughter had stung more than he wanted to admit. Maybe they were right. Maybe the cabin was just a burden, a final strange decision from an eccentric old uncle. Maybe he was being foolish, sentimental, impractical, all the things they had always accused him of being. But as he started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, another memory surfaced. He was 12 years old, sitting on the cabin's porch with Uncle Gerald as the sun set over the mountains. His uncle had pointed to the land stretching out before them and said something Marcus had never forgotten. Most people look at things and only see what's on the surface, Marcus, but the real value is often hidden, waiting for someone patient enough to discover it. Marcus didn't know what his uncle had meant then, and he wasn't sure he knew now. But he was certain of one thing. Before he made any decisions about that property, he was going to visit it. He owed Uncle Gerald that much. He owed himself that much. His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Seriously, though, don't waste your time driving all the way up there. It's not worth the gas money. Marcus silenced his phone and drove home, already planning his trip north. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped back to admire his work. The cabin's new porch gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, built from locally sourced timber that had been milled just 20 miles away. It had taken him 3 months to get to this point, 3 months of learning carpentry from YouTube videos and advice from friendly locals, 3 months of sore muscles and splinters and small victories. The transformation was remarkable, but it was nothing compared to what was happening beneath the surface of his property. The geological survey had come back 6 weeks after Marcus moved to the cabin full-time. He had used almost all of his savings to hire Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected geologist from the State University who had driven up to examine the land. She had spent 3 days taking samples, studying Uncle Gerald's old research, and conducting tests that Marcus barely understood. When she finally sat down with him at the makeshift table in the cabin, her eyes were bright with excitement. "Your uncle was onto something significant," she had said, spreading out maps and charts. "This aquifer beneath your property is remarkable. The water is naturally filtered through limestone and mineral deposits, giving it exceptional purity and a unique mineral composition. Companies pay a fortune to artificially create water with this profile. You have it occurring naturally." Marcus had stared at the charts, afraid to let himself hope. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Dr. Chen had continued, "that if you wanted to, you could sustainably bottle this water and sell it as premium natural spring water. The flow rate is excellent, and based on these readings, the aquifer could support commercial extraction for decades without depleting. We're talking about a renewable resource that requires minimal processing." But that wasn't all. The soil samples had revealed something even more valuable. The property contained deposits of lithium and rare earth elements, minerals that were becoming increasingly critical for manufacturing batteries, electronics, and renewable energy technology. The deposits weren't massive, but they were significant enough to be commercially viable, especially given the growing global demand. "You're sitting on a small fortune, Dr. Chen had told him bluntly. "But here's the important part. How you develop this will matter. Done wrong, mining can destroy the land and contaminate the water. Done right, with the proper environmental controls and sustainable practices, you can extract value while preserving the ecosystem." Marcus had thanked her, paid her fee, and then sat alone on the porch for hours after she left, trying to process what he had learned. Uncle Gerald had known. All those surveys, all that research, all those years of quietly studying the land. His uncle had known exactly what was here, and he had left it to Marcus, the nephew who had listened to his stories, who had appreciated the forest for more than just what could be taken from it. The next challenge had been figuring out what to do with this information. Marcus wasn't a businessman. He didn't know the first thing about mining operations or water bottling companies, but he knew he didn't want to sell the land outright to some corporation that would strip it bare and move on. He wanted to do this right, the way Uncle Gerald would have wanted. He started making calls, doing research, reaching out to people who might help him navigate this new world. He contacted environmental consulting firms, sustainable mining operations, and small water bottling companies that emphasized ecological responsibility. Many didn't return his calls. Some were dismissive of a high school teacher trying to play entrepreneur, but a few listened. One of those who listened was James Rodriguez, a mining consultant who specialized in sustainable extraction methods. James drove up to visit the property and spent a week analyzing the land, the mineral deposits, and the potential for responsible development. He was a quiet man in his 50s with weathered hands and a careful way of speaking that reminded Marcus of Uncle Gerald. "Most mining operations treat the land as an obstacle," James had explained as they walked the property boundaries. "They remove everything in their way, extract what they want, and leave behind damage that takes generations to heal. But there are better ways. Selective extraction, careful restoration, working with the land's natural systems instead of against them." James helped Marcus understand his options. They could partner with a mining company that specialized in low-impact extraction, one that would use advanced techniques to minimize environmental disruption. The technology existed to extract the minerals they needed while preserving most of the land's surface, protecting the aquifer, and ensuring that wildlife habitats remained intact. Around the same time, Marcus was contacted by Mountain Pure Waters, a small but growing company that focused on sustainably sourced spring water. Their CEO, Margaret Liu, was a former environmental scientist who had built her company on the principle that commercial success and ecological responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. She flew to Montana to meet with Marcus personally. "I've reviewed Dr. Chen's report," Margaret said as they sat in the renovated cabin, now equipped with solar panels and a basic water filtration system Marcus had installed himself. "Your water source is exceptional. The mineral profile is exactly what health-conscious consumers are looking for. But, more importantly, you have the opportunity to do this right from the beginning." They talked for hours about what responsible water extraction would look like. Limited daily extraction rates that the aquifer could sustain indefinitely, monitoring systems to ensure the ecosystem remained balanced, a portion of proceeds dedicated to land conservation. Margaret wasn't just interested in the water. She was interested in the story and being part of something that proved business could be done differently. The negotiations took months. Marcus consulted with environmental lawyers, water rights experts, and conservation groups. He wanted to make sure that every agreement protected the land first and generated profit second. There were moments when he doubted himself, when the complexity of it all made him want to just sell everything and go back to teaching. But then he would remember Uncle Gerald's letter, would walk the property in the early morning mist, and would find his resolve again. The breakthrough came when a major technology company, Green Tech Industries, approached him about purchasing mineral rights. They were investing heavily in domestic sources of battery materials and rare earth elements, trying to build a supply chain that didn't depend on foreign sources or environmentally destructive practices. Their offer was substantial, $4.2 million for partial mineral extraction rights over a 20-year period, but Marcus negotiated hard. He insisted on retaining ownership of the land. He demanded environmental oversight authority, the right to halt operations if damage occurred. He required that GreenTech use James Rodriguez's consulting firm to ensure best practices, and he stipulated that a portion of the extracted materials be allocated to educational institutions researching sustainable technologies. When GreenTech agreed to his terms, Marcus felt a strange mixture of triumph and disbelief. He had gone from being the family disappointment to the owner of a multi-million-dollar asset in less than 18 months. But more than the money, he was proud of how he had done it. The land would be protected. The water would flow clean for generations. The minerals would be extracted carefully and used for technologies that could help build a more sustainable future. The cabin itself had become a testament to what was possible. Marcus had rebuilt it almost entirely using sustainable materials and off-grid technologies. Solar panels on the roof provided electricity. A sophisticated rainwater collection system supplemented the well he had drilled. The interior was warm and welcoming, with handmade furniture crafted from fallen trees on the property. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity and functionality. Word began to spread in unexpected ways. A journalist from a regional magazine came to interview him about sustainable land use. That article caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker named Alex Thompson, who was working on a series about people finding innovative solutions to environmental challenges. Alex spent 2 weeks filming at the property, interviewing Marcus, Dr. Terry, Chen, James Rodriguez, and Margaret Liu. "Your story is important," Alex told Marcus as they watched the sunset from the porch one evening. "Not just because of the money or the success, but because you prove that thinking long-term and thinking ethically can actually work. Too many people believe you have to choose between doing well and doing good. You're showing that's a false choice." The documentary segment aired on a streaming platform and unexpectedly went viral. Suddenly, Marcus was getting interview requests from environmental podcasts, invitations to speak at sustainability conferences, and emails from people who were inspired by his story. A professor from his old university reached out to discuss using the property as a teaching site for environmental science students. Marcus had to hire a part-time assistant just to manage the attention and the various business aspects of his new life. He chose Emma, a recent environmental studies graduate from a nearby town who had grown up on a ranch and understood both the business side and the land conservation side of what he was trying to accomplish. The financial impact was transformative, but not in the way his siblings might have imagined. Marcus didn't buy a mansion or a luxury car. He renovated the cabin to be comfortable but not extravagant. He invested in more solar panels and battery systems, making the entire property completely energy independent. He bought quality tools and equipment for maintaining the land, and he started planning something bigger. The idea had come to him gradually. He had been given an incredible opportunity, one that Uncle Gerald had carefully preserved and passed on to him. What if he could do the same for others? What if he could take some of this unexpected wealth and use it to create opportunities for young people who loved the land but didn't have the resources to pursue their dreams? He started researching how to establish a foundation. He consulted with nonprofit experts and educational administrators. And slowly, carefully, he began to build the framework for what would become the Gerald Henderson Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing scholarships for students from rural areas who wanted to study environmental science, sustainable agriculture, forestry management, or related fields. Marcus wanted to help kids like he had been, kids who loved being outside, who understood the value of wild places, who saw potential where others saw emptiness, kids who might be laughed at by their families for choosing passion over profit, but who would go on to find ways to bridge that false divide. The foundation would award its first scholarships the following year. Marcus had committed $500,000 of his initial payment from Green Tech to fund it, with plans to add more as the mineral extraction and water bottling operations generated ongoing revenue. Meanwhile, his social media presence, which he had reluctantly started at Emma's urging, was growing. He posted photos of the property, updates on the conservation efforts, and educational content about sustainable land use. He was careful never to disclose the exact location of the cabin. He wanted to protect his privacy and the land itself, but people responded to the authenticity of what he was doing. One post in particular had gotten widespread attention. It was a simple photo of the cabin at sunrise, mist rising from the valley, with a caption that read, "18 months ago, my family laughed when I inherited this place. They called it worthless." But worth isn't always measured in dollars. Sometimes it's measured in clean water, healthy soil, and the knowledge that you're leaving something better than you found it. The post had been shared thousands of times, with comments from people sharing their own stories of being underestimated, of choosing unconventional paths, of finding value where others saw none. Through it all, Marcus tried to stay grounded. He still woke up early, still spent hours working on the land, still found peace in the quiet mornings when the only sounds were birdsong and the distant creek. The money was wonderful, the recognition was flattering, but what mattered most was that he had honored Uncle Gerald's trust. He had looked beyond the surface and found the hidden value his uncle had known was there all along. As autumn approached and the aspens began turning gold, Marcus stood on his porch one evening and thought about the past 18 months. The mockery from his siblings seemed like a lifetime ago. The doubt and isolation he had felt seemed almost unimaginable now. He had been transformed not just in circumstances, but in confidence, in purpose, in his understanding of what he was capable of achieving. His phone buzzed with a notification. The local news wanted to do a story about the Green Tech deal, which had just been publicly announced. The headline would read, "Local teacher turns inherited property into multi-million-dollar sustainable development." Marcus smiled and put the phone away. Let them write their stories. He had work to do, land to protect, and a foundation to build. The real transformation was only just beginning. The Christmas lights twinkled in the dining room of Marcus's childhood home, casting warm colors across the faces gathered around the large table. It was the first major family gathering since the news had broken about Marcus's business deals, and the atmosphere felt thick with unspoken tension. Marcus had driven down from Montana 3 days earlier, staying in his old apartment which he had kept even though he now spent most of his time at the cabin. His mother had insisted on this dinner, as she did every year, but this time felt different. Everyone knew it would be different. The news coverage had been impossible to ignore. The local paper had run a front-page story. The documentary had been viewed by hundreds of thousands of people, and the announcement of the $4.2 million deal with Green Tech had made it onto the regional business news. Jennifer arrived first, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she entered. She wore an expensive burgundy dress and carried a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Marcus used to spend on groceries in a month. Her smile was bright but didn't quite reach her eyes as she hugged him. "Marcus," she said warmly, "congratulations on everything. We're all so proud of you." It was a jarring change from 18 months ago when she had laughed at his inheritance and called the cabin a worthless shack. Marcus accepted the hug but remained cautious. He had learned that sincerity and performance could look very similar on the surface. Robert came next with his wife Amanda, carrying gifts wrapped in shiny paper. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder with perhaps a bit too much enthusiasm. "There's the man of the hour," Robert announced loudly. "The genius who turned trash into treasure. I've got to admit, little brother, you really proved us all wrong." Marcus nodded politely, noting how Robert's version of events was already being rewritten. There was no acknowledgement of the mockery, no mention of how Robert had told him he was wasting his time and throwing his life away. Just this new narrative where they had always believed in him, always known he would succeed. Patricia was the last to arrive, and she came with her husband Kenneth, a tall man with graying temples who worked in investment banking. Kenneth made a point of seeking Marcus out immediately, cornering him near the fireplace before dinner was served. "Marcus, I've been meaning to reach out to you," Kenneth said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone used to making deals. "I've been following what you're doing up in Montana with great interest. Very impressive. I work with several clients who are looking for opportunities in the sustainable development space. Green investments are huge right now, massive growth potential. I'd love to sit down with you sometime and discuss some possibilities. Marcus took a sip of his drink, studying Kenneth's eager expression. What kind of possibilities? Well, expansion for one thing, Kenneth said, leaning in as if sharing a secret. You've proven the model works on your property. Imagine scaling that up. We could help you acquire adjacent land, replicate the water bottling operation, explore similar mineral deposits in the region. With the right investors and the right strategy, you could turn this into something much bigger. I'm not really interested in expanding right now, Marcus said carefully. I'm focused on doing this one property right, on honoring my uncle's legacy. Kenneth's smile didn't waver, but Marcus saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or frustration in not getting the answer he wanted. Of course, I completely understand. But keep me in mind if you change your thinking. The offer stands. Family helps family, right? Marcus excused himself and moved toward the kitchen where his mother was putting final touches on the dinner. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. Setting down the serving spoon, she walked over and embraced him tightly. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry I didn't support you. I'm sorry I told you to be realistic, to sell the cabin. I should have trusted you. I should have believed in you. This, at least, felt genuine. Marcus hugged his mother back, feeling some of the armor he had built around himself begin to soften. It's okay, Mom. You were trying to protect... I understand that. No, she insisted, pulling back to look at him directly. It wasn't okay. You told us what you wanted to do and we laughed at you. Jennifer laughed. Robert made jokes. Patricia tried to buy the land from you for nothing, and I... She paused, wiping her eyes. I sided with them. I made you feel like your dreams were foolish. What kind of mother does that? Marcus didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her it was all forgiven, that everything had worked out fine. But another part of him, the part that had felt so alone and doubted during those early months, couldn't quite let it go that easily. I appreciate you saying that, he finally said. It means a lot. Dinner was an awkward affair despite everyone's attempts at normalcy. The conversation kept circling back to Marcus and his success, but in ways that felt forced and uncomfortable. Robert told a long story about a time he had almost invested in rural property but decided against it, clearly trying to find some way to relate to Marcus's experience. Jennifer mentioned that several of her corporate clients were now interested in sustainable land development and asked if Marcus might want to consult with them. Patricia, who had been relatively quiet, finally spoke up during dessert. Marcus, I owe you an apology, she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. The table fell silent. When Uncle Gerald's will was read, I offered to buy the property from you for $15,000. I thought I was doing you a favor, saving you from a burden. But really, I was being condescending and dismissive. I didn't take you seriously, and I'm sorry for that. It was perhaps the most honest moment of the evening. Marcus appreciated it, even as he noted that her apology didn't mention all the other comments, all the laughter, all the suggestions that he needed therapy for being obsessed with the cabin. Thank you for saying that, Marcus replied. I appreciate the apology. Kenneth, apparently unable to help himself, jumped in. You know, Patricia was actually showing good business instinct with that offer. $15,000 for what appeared to be a property with significant liabilities and minimal assets. That was a reasonable assessment based on available information at the time. Marcus felt a flash of irritation. Even Patricia's apology was being reframed as somehow smart or strategic rather than simply wrong and hurtful. It was condescending, Marcus said firmly, looking at Kenneth and then at his sister. It wasn't a business decision. It was an assumption that I didn't know what I was doing, that I needed to be rescued from my own choices. A difference. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. His mother looked down at her plate. Jennifer suddenly became very interested in her wineglass. It was his youngest niece, Patricia's 10-year-old daughter Emma, who broke the tension. Uncle Marcus, can I come visit your cabin sometime? I saw the pictures online and it looks amazing. Mom showed me the documentary too. The part about the water was so cool. Marcus felt himself smile genuinely for the first time that evening. I'd love that, Emma. Maybe next summer, if your parents agree. I could show you the property, teach you about the ecosystem, maybe do some hiking. That would be awesome. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious and uncomplicated, a reminder that not everything had to be weighted with adult complications and regrets. After dinner, as people moved into the living room for coffee, Robert pulled Marcus aside. His earlier bravado had faded, and he looked almost vulnerable. Look, I know I was a jerk about the whole cabin thing, Robert admitted quietly. I thought I was being practical, being the voice of reason, but really I was just jealous. This surprised Marcus? Jealous? Of what? You've always been the successful one. Robert laughed bitterly. Successful by whose definition? Yeah, I make good money. I have a nice house and nice cars, but I hate what I do, Marcus. I hate the car business. It's all sales tactics and manipulating people into spending more than they should. Every day I wake up and think about how I ended up here, doing something I don't care about, just because it pays well. He paused, looking out the window into the dark backyard. When you inherited that cabin and decided to go for it, to actually try something different, something meaningful, I mocked you because I was envious. I would never have the courage to do what you did. I'm too afraid of failing, too locked into this life I've built. And when you succeeded, when you actually pulled it off, he trailed off, shaking his head. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never imagined that Robert, Golden Child Robert, might be struggling with his own regrets and disappointments. It's not too late, Marcus offered. You could make changes if you wanted to. Maybe, Robert said doubtfully. But I have obligations, a mortgage, kids in private school. It's not as simple as it used to be. He looked at Marcus with something like respect. You did it right, making your move when you did. I hope you know how rare that is, to actually follow through on something like that. As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, Jennifer approached Marcus at the door. Unlike the others, she didn't apologize or make excuses. Instead, she handed him a business card. This is the contact information for the head of my firm's environmental law division, she said. No strings attached, no expectation that you'll use our services. But if you ever need advice on land conservation trusts, environmental regulations, or protecting your property rights, these are good people. Consider it a resource, nothing more. It was the first gesture that felt like it came without an agenda, without an attempt to rewrite history or insert herself into his success. Marcus took the card and nodded. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. She smiled, and this time it looked more genuine. You did something remarkable, Marcus. I'm sorry I didn't see it coming, and I'm sorry I made you feel small for trying. That's all I wanted to say. After everyone had left, Marcus helped his mother clean up. They worked in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke. What are you going to do now? She asked. I mean, beyond the foundation and the property management. What's next for you? Marcus considered the question. Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. The foundation will be a big part of it, making sure kids who love the land get a chance to study it, to work with it, but I'm also thinking about the cabin itself. I've had some interest from researchers who want to use it as a field station, and from environmental education programs looking for teaching sites. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What Uncle Gerald gave me wasn't just land or money. He gave me a purpose, a way to make a real difference. I don't want to waste that. I don't want to just be the guy who got lucky with an inheritance. His mother smiled, tears forming in her eyes again. Gerald would be so proud of you. He always said you had something special, that you saw the world differently than the rest of us. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I do now. Later that night, back in his old apartment, Marcus sat at his desk and opened his laptop. There were dozens of emails waiting, interview requests, business inquiries, messages from people inspired by his story, but one email caught his attention. It was from a professor at the state university, someone he had met briefly at a sustainability conference. The subject line read, Research Partnership Opportunity. Marcus opened it and read, Dear Mr. Henderson, I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing to propose a unique partnership between your property and our environmental science department. We're interested in establishing a long-term ecological monitoring program on your land, studying how sustainable extraction practices affect ecosystem health over time. This would provide valuable data for the field while also ensuring scientific oversight of the operations on your property. We would also like to discuss using the cabin as an occasional field station for graduate students. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. This was exactly the kind of thing he had hoped for, ways to use what he had been given to contribute to something larger than himself. He began typing a response, but paused to look at the photo on his desk. It showed him and Uncle Gerald standing in front of the cabin 20 years ago, both of them smiling, young Marcus holding a fish he had caught in the creek. His uncle's hand rested on his shoulder, proud and supportive. Thank you, Marcus whispered to the photo. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. Thank you for trusting me with this. Outside, snow began to fall softly over the city, but Marcus's thoughts were already back in Montana, in the mountains, on the land that had changed everything. His family's regret was their own to manage. His path forward was clear, and for the first time in his life he felt absolutely certain that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning sun filtered through the tall pines surrounding the cabin, casting long shadows across the newly built deck where Marcus sat with his coffee. It was early June, nearly 2 years since he had first returned to this property that everyone had dismissed as worthless. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers from the meadow below and the distant sound of the creek that had been his constant companion through all the changes. Marcus had developed a morning routine that he cherished. He would wake at dawn, make coffee in the small but efficient kitchen he had built, and sit on the deck for an hour before the day's activities began. This quiet time had become sacred to him, a moment to reflect and center himself before engaging with the increasingly busy life he now led. His phone buzzed with a message from Emma, his assistant. The first group of scholarship recipients from the Gerald Henderson Foundation would be visiting the property next week for an orientation program. There were 12 students, all from rural communities across Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, all passionate about environmental science and sustainable land management. They would spend a week at the cabin learning from visiting professors, conducting field research, and experiencing firsthand what responsible land stewardship looked like. Marcus smiled as he read through the students' profiles that Emma had sent. There was Sophia, a rancher's daughter who wanted to study regenerative agriculture. Daniel, whose family had lost their farm to drought, now determined to understand climate adaptation strategies. Marie, who had grown up on a Native American reservation and wanted to combine traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation science. Each story reminded him of himself, young people who loved the land but worried they might never afford the education to work with it professionally. The foundation had awarded its first scholarships 3 months ago, a moment that had been more emotional for Marcus than any of the business deals or media attention. Standing in front of those 12 young people and their families, telling them that their dreams were valid and achievable, that someone believed in them enough to invest in their future, it had felt like the truest expression of Uncle Gerald's legacy. A truck rumbled up the improved road that now led to the cabin. Marcus had invested in upgrading the access route, though he had deliberately kept it unpaved to maintain the property's natural character and limit casual traffic. The vehicle belonged to James Rodriguez, the mining consultant who had become not just a business partner but a genuine friend over the past 2 years. "Morning, Marcus," James called out as he climbed out of the truck, carrying a folder of documents. "Brought the quarterly environmental impact reports. Thought you'd want to review them before they go out to the regulators and the public." This transparency had been one of Marcus's non-negotiable conditions from the beginning. Every 3 months, independent environmental scientists assessed the impact of the mining and water extraction operations. The reports measured everything from soil quality to wildlife populations, from water purity to vegetation health. And every report was made publicly available, posted on the Foundation's website for anyone to review. They sat together on the deck, going through the data. The news was good. Better than good, actually. 2 years into the extraction operations, the ecosystem was thriving. Wildlife populations had remained stable and, in some cases, increased, likely because the restrictions on public access and hunting had created an unofficial sanctuary. The aquifer showed no signs of depletion, with water quality remaining consistently excellent. The selective mining techniques were working exactly as James had promised they would, extracting valuable minerals while leaving the landscape largely intact. "You know what's remarkable?" James said, leaning back in his chair and looking out over the valley. "Usually by year 2 of a mining operation, we're already seeing degradation. Trees dying, streams getting muddy, animals moving away. Here, it's the opposite. The land is healthier now than when we started because you've been actively managing it, removing invasive species, replanting natives, managing the forest properly." Marcus felt a swell of pride. This was what Uncle Gerald had wanted. Proof that economic value and environmental health weren't opposing forces. They could coexist, even support each other, if people were willing to prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term profit. After James left, Marcus spent the afternoon working on the trails. He had been developing a network of hiking paths throughout the property, carefully routed to showcase the land's beauty while avoiding sensitive ecological areas. These trails would be used by the scholarship students, by visiting researchers, and eventually by carefully limited educational tours that would help fund the Foundation's ongoing work. As he cleared fallen branches and reinforced a wooden bridge over a small stream, his mind wandered to his family. The relationship with his siblings had evolved into something complex and still somewhat fragile. They had each made their apologies in various ways, some more genuine than others. But the dynamic had fundamentally changed, and there was no going back to how things had been. Jennifer had actually become an unexpected ally. She had connected him with excellent environmental lawyers who had helped structure the Foundation properly and protect the land with conservation easements that would survive beyond his lifetime. She called occasionally, their conversations now more real and less performative. She had even admitted during their last call that watching him succeed had made her question her own choices, wonder if the prestige and money of corporate law were worth the toll it took on her personal life. Robert's relationship with Marcus remained more distant. He sent occasional texts, usually asking business questions or sharing articles about sustainable development. Marcus suspected Robert was living vicariously through him, imagining the life he might have lived if he had been braver. It was sad in a way, but Marcus had learned he couldn't fix his brother's regrets. Robert would have to find his own path to peace. Patricia had surprised him the most. After their conversation at Christmas, she had started volunteering with environmental education programs in her community. She brought her children to visit the cabin last summer, and watching her daughter Emma's face light up as they explored the forest had reminded Marcus why all of this mattered. Patricia had quietly donated $10,000 to the foundation, refusing any public acknowledgement. It was her way of making amends, Marcus understood, and he accepted it in that spirit. His mother visited regularly now, more often than any of his siblings. She had started painting again, a hobby she had abandoned decades ago, and the cabin inspired her. She would set up her easel on the deck and spend hours capturing the play of light on the mountains, the colors of wildflowers in the meadow, the reflections in the creek. Her art was good, surprisingly good, and Marcus had hung several of her paintings inside the cabin. I forgot who I was for a while, she had told him during her last visit. I got so caught up in worrying about success and security and what the neighbors thought that I forgot what actually matters. You remembered, or maybe you never forgot. Gerald saw that in you. A notification on his phone pulled Marcus back to the present. It was from Margaret Liu, the CEO of Mountain Pure Waters. The company's spring water source for Marcus's property had launched 6 months ago and was exceeding all sales projections. The marketing campaign, which focused on the story of sustainable sourcing and land conservation, had resonated with consumers who were increasingly conscious about environmental impact. Margaret's message included photos from a new retail display in a major grocery chain. The bottles featured a sketch of the cabin and mountains, with text explaining that a portion of every purchase supported environmental education scholarships. Marcus had insisted on this from the beginning. The commercial success of the water would directly fund opportunities for young people who wanted to protect places like this. The afternoon brought another visitor, someone Marcus had been expecting. Dr. Sarah Chen, the geologist who had first confirmed the property's value, arrived with 2 graduate students who would be spending the summer conducting research on the land. They were studying how sustainable extraction practices affected long-term geological stability, and Marcus's property provided a perfect case study. This is going to be groundbreaking research, Sarah explained as they walked the property together. We'll be able to provide concrete data about sustainable mining practices, information that could influence policy and industry standards. And it's all possible because you were willing to do things differently, to prioritize the science alongside the business. As they walked, Marcus noticed how much he had learned over the past 2 years. Dozens of plant species now, knew the migration patterns of the elk that passed through each fall, understood the geological formations that made this land unique. He had become a student of this place, devoted to understanding it deeply so he could protect it properly. Evening came slowly, as it always did in summer at this latitude. Marcus prepared dinner in his kitchen, simple food made from ingredients he had bought at the farmer's market in the nearest town. He had become friendly with many of the local farmers and ranchers, people who initially viewed him with suspicion but gradually came to respect what he was doing. Several had asked his advice about conservation easements for their own land, about sustainable practices they might adopt, about how to balance preservation and productivity. After dinner, Marcus sat at the desk where Uncle Gerald had once worked on his surveys and research. The desk was covered now with Marcus's own papers, foundation documents, scholarship applications, speaking engagement invitations, research proposals. His life had become busier than he ever imagined, pulled in dozens of directions by people who wanted his time, his money, his endorsement, his story. But he had learned to set boundaries, to protect the quiet spaces in his life that allowed him to think and reflect. He had learned to say no to opportunities that didn't align with his values, even lucrative ones. He had learned that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of becoming someone he didn't recognize. He opened his laptop and began working on a speech he would give next month at a conference on sustainable land management. But his eyes kept drifting to a framed letter on the wall. Uncle Gerald's letter, the one that had started everything. Marcus, you were the only one who listened. The land will provide, but only if you're patient and respectful. Don't let them take this from you. The land had provided more abundantly than Marcus could have imagined. But not just in money or success. It had provided purpose, meaning, connection to something larger than himself. It had provided a way to honor someone who had believed in him when few others did. It had provided a path forward that felt authentic and true. Marcus thought about the scholarship students who would arrive next week, about the wonder and excitement they would feel exploring this place. He thought about the research that would be conducted here, knowledge that might help protect other wild places. He thought about the water flowing from this land to people across the country, carrying with it a story about doing business differently. He thought about the minerals being carefully extracted, used to build technologies that might help address climate change. All of it connected back to a decision he had made 2 years ago, a decision his family had laughed at. The memory of that laughter didn't sting anymore. If anything, he felt grateful for it. Their doubt had forced him to develop conviction, to trust his own judgment even when everyone around him thought he was wrong. Their mockery had become fuel that powered him through the difficult early months when success seemed far from guaranteed. He understood now that their regret was less about the money he had made and more about the life he had built. Money could be earned in many ways, but finding genuine purpose and fulfillment was far more rare and valuable. A meteor streaked across the darkening sky, bright and brief. Marcus watched it fade and thought about trajectories, about how a single moment or decision could alter the entire course of a life. Inheriting the cabin had been that moment for him, but the real transformation came from choosing to see possibility where others saw only problems. His phone buzzed one more time. It was a message from a high school student in rural Idaho who had read about the foundation online. "I want to be a forest ranger like your uncle," the message read. "But my family says it's not a real career, that I should do something practical." "How did you know you were making the right choice? How did you stay confident when everyone doubted you?" Marcus smiled and began typing a response about Uncle Gerald, about listening to your own inner compass, about the difference between being practical and being afraid. He wrote about how the right path often looks foolish from the outside, how real courage means acting on your values even when you're alone in doing so. As he finished the message and hit send, Marcus felt the satisfying weight of his day's purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new people to inspire or learn from. But tonight he was exactly where he wanted to be, in the cabin that everyone had laughed at, on the land that had changed everything, living a life that felt entirely his own. He stepped outside one final time before bed, breathing in the mountain air and listening to the creek's endless song. The stars were emerging, brilliant and infinite against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there were young people dreaming of futures they didn't quite dare believe in, people being told their passions weren't practical, their dreams weren't valuable. Marcus hoped his story might reach some of them, might give them permission to trust themselves, to see value where others saw waste, to choose meaning over mockery. The cabin stood solid behind him, no longer a burden or a joke, but a testament to what was possible when someone looked beyond the surface and saw what was really there. Uncle Gerald had been right all along. The real value had been hidden, waiting patiently for someone willing to discover it. And Marcus had been that someone, not because he was smarter or luckier than anyone else, but because he had been willing to listen, to believe, and to act on that belief even when the entire world seemed to be laughing.